Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. I didn't plan on saying any of this. Not here, not like this. I have rehearsed so many versions of this moment in my head. What I'd say, how I'd say it, and whether I should say anything at all. But nothing ever felt right. Nothing ever felt safe. And maybe that's the point. Some truths were never meant to be delivered in perfectly packaged statements or staged interviews. Some truths just escape you when your heart can't hold them in anymore. And I think that's what this is. An escape, a confession, a release. Not long ago, I found myself standing in front of a mirror backstage after a performance, sweat dripping, heart racing, adrenaline still humming through my body. And yet, the only thing I saw staring back at me was someone tired of pretending. Someone who had spent years living two lives. The one the world knows, and the one I've kept hidden, buried under layers of silence, loyalty, and fear. This isn't a scandal. It's not a headline. It's a truth. And that truth has a name, Jimin. I've known him longer than I've known the limits of my own voice. I've heard him laugh in hotel rooms at 2 a.m., whisper encouragement before we stepped on stage, cry quietly on long car rides when the weight of the world felt too much for either of us. He's been my anchor in the chaos, and the chaos that anchors me. There's never been a line between where my friendship with him ends and something deeper begins, at least not for me. But for the longest time, I convinced myself that line had to exist. Because people don't understand when idols talk about love, especially love that doesn't come wrapped in the expected packaging. People want you to stay forever young, forever perfect, forever available for their fantasy. And anything outside that mold becomes dangerous, risky, selfish. I used to believe that too. I thought that if I kept my feelings locked away, if I played the role, smiled when expected, stayed silent when asked, then maybe, just maybe, I could protect him, protect us. But what I didn't realize was that silence is not the same thing as safety. Sometimes it's just another kind of prison. There were moments, quiet, small ones, that I'll never forget. The way his hand would brush mine and linger a second too long when no one was looking. The nights we stayed up talking about dreams we didn't dare share with the rest of the world. The way he looked at me sometimes, not like I was Jungkook of BTS, but like I was just a boy he trusted with the most vulnerable parts of himself. And then there were the moments that broke me. Watching him smile at fans while knowing he'd just spent an hour crying in the green room. Hearing him laugh in interviews while feeling the distance between us grow because we weren't allowed to be seen. Not like that, not as we were. I started to ask myself, what are we protecting, really? Is it our careers, our image, our fans? Or is it the illusion that we're not human, that we don't feel, that we don't love? The more I asked that question, the heavier it became. You see, this isn't just about me, or even about Jimin. It's about what happens when two people love each other in a world that only allows that love to exist behind closed doors. It's about the fear of ruining what we built with our brothers in BTS, of letting down the fans who gave us everything, of facing a world that isn't ready to understand. But I can't keep living half a life, because every time I stay silent, I feel like I'm erasing the most honest part of myself. Every time I hide what Jimin means to me, I feel like I'm betraying something sacred, not just between us, but inside me. I've watched him carry so much on his shoulders. He hides it well. People think he's delicate, soft, fragile, but they don't know how strong he is. They don't know the fire in his chest when he dances, the steel in his voice when he defends someone he loves, the silence he endures to keep the peace. And I've loved him for all of it, quietly, fully, always. This isn't me asking for forgiveness. It's not even me asking for understanding. This is me finally saying out loud what I've only ever whispered into the darkness. I love him. And not just in the way you love a friend or a brother or a bandmate. Not in the way that's easy to package or sell or explain away in a press conference, but in the way that changes you. That ruins you for anything else. That makes you terrified and brave at the same time. This is the confession I never meant to make. But I can't keep pretending that being silent is the same as being strong. It's not. So here it is, my truth. Take it, twist it, reject it, love it. I can't control that anymore. All I know is that I owe it to him, to myself, and to every person out there who has ever hidden their heart just to survive, to finally say it. Jimin has always been more than anyone ever knew. And this is just the beginning of the story I never thought I'd be brave enough to tell. After I said those words, after I finally admitted what I've kept inside for years, I sat in the quiet and wondered what would happen next. There was no applause, no comfort, just silence, but not the kind that brings peace. This silence was heavy, like a storm that hadn't broken yet. A silence filled with everything I was afraid to lose. And I've lost things before, opportunities, freedom, pieces of myself. But the one thing I kept sacrificing again and again was us. Because loving Jimin in silence might seem like a choice, but it was never a real one. It was survival, it was strategy, it was the only way I knew how to protect the one person I could never let the world touch. You have to understand something. The world doesn't just look at idols, it owns them. It decides who we're allowed to be, what we're allowed to feel, and how much of our souls we're allowed to show before it becomes too much. The moment you step out of the boundaries, whether it's dating, breaking a contract, or simply loving someone, the world doesn't expect you to become a threat. And threats must be silenced. I learned that early. Not from rules or books or managers, but from the looks, the headlines, the way fans shifted their tone when rumors surfaced, the way brands hinted at discomfort, the way people praised us for being close, but only if that closeness stayed innocent and imaginary. Jimin and I, we never asked for this cage. We never agreed to its terms. But somewhere along the way, we both stepped inside it because it was safer than standing in the open with a target on our backs. We built something beautiful behind walls, but even beauty wilts in the dark. There was a time when I thought this was enough. Late night conversations, shared songs, hidden glances. We had our own world, small and quiet. But eventually, I started to wonder, what's the point of building a world if we're too afraid to live in it? Jimin has always been careful with his heart. He gives so much to everyone, yet keeps the most vulnerable parts locked away. But when he loves, he does it with his whole soul. And that's what broke me the most, knowing that someone who had given me so much had to shrink himself to stay beside me. We lived in shadows, not because we wanted to, but because we were told it was the only way to keep going. And still, we kept going. I remember a moment. It was after a concert years ago. The adrenaline had worn off. Everyone was in their rooms, and the hall was quiet. Jimin and I ended up sitting on the floor of the hallway, backs against the wall, legs stretched out, heads tilted back. Neither of us said much. But then he whispered, "Do you think there'll ever be a time when we don't have to hide?" I didn't know how to answer. I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell him yes, that the world was changing, that people would understand, that love was strong enough to break through anything. But I couldn't lie to him. So I said nothing. And in that silence, I watched him nod slowly, like he had already expected that answer. That was the moment I realized what silence costs. It doesn't just steal your voice, it steals your hope, your belief that things can change. It teaches you to make yourself smaller, to avoid eye contact with your own reflection, to smile while your heart cracks. I saw that in Jimin, and I hated it, but I didn't know how to fix it. Because every time we even talked about going public, the list of consequences grew longer. Brands, contracts, trust, fans, the group, the legacy, the press, family, safety. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that if we took even one step forward, the fall might be fatal. Not just for us, but for everyone around us, for people we love, people who depend on us, people who've sacrificed everything just to see us shine. So we stayed back, we laughed louder to cover the cracks. We called it friendship, so people would stop looking deeper. We convinced ourselves that what we had was enough. But deep down, we both knew it wasn't. Because no matter how brightly we shined on stage, something always followed us off of it. A shadow, a weight, a quiet ache that never went away. And the longer we stayed quiet, the more it hurt. I don't think fans realize what it's like to perform songs about love and honesty while hiding the person who makes those songs real for you. to pour your soul into lyrics that aren't allowed to belong to anyone out loud, to smile in interviews and dodge questions and pretend like your heart isn't already spoken for. It's not just hard, it's heartbreaking. There were nights when I looked at Jimin and wanted to reach for his hand, not in secret, not in darkness, but right there in the light. I wanted to tell the world, this is the person who keeps me grounded. This is the person who inspires me. This is the person I love. But I didn't, because I was afraid, not just for me, but for him. Because if loving him meant exposing him to hate, to danger, to the cruel voices that echo louder online than in real life, was it worth it? I still don't know. But what I do know is this: silence may have protected us, but it also robbed us of so many moments we'll never get back. And that's something I can't ignore anymore. This confession, this truth I'm speaking now, it's not about revenge or rebellion or headlines. It's about taking back the parts of myself I gave away too easily. It's about giving Jimin what he has always deserved. A love that is not hidden, not whispered, not denied. It's about stepping out of the cage, even if the world isn't ready to welcome us. Because maybe, just maybe, I'm finally ready to be free. Freedom sounds simple when you say the word out loud, but when you're actually standing in front of it, when you realize what it costs, it stops feeling like a dream and starts feeling like a gamble. After years of silence, I began to understand something I hadn't wanted to admit before. Jimin and I were carrying a weight we never chose, a weight placed on us the moment we stepped into this world as idols. A weight made heavier every time we smiled on stage, every time we reassured fans that we were okay. Every time we chose harmony over honesty. People often say, you knew what you signed up for, but no one ever signs up to erase themselves. I remember the first time I noticed how careful Jimin had become. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. It was subtle, like watching someone slowly learn to hold their breath underwater. The way he paused before speaking. The way he checked his surroundings, even in places that used to feel safe. The way his laughter sometimes arrived a second too late, like it had to pass through fear before it could exist. That scared me more than any rumor ever could. Because fear changes people quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It just settles into your bones and convinces you that this is normal, that this is adulthood, that this is the price of success. But I knew better. I could feel it myself too. I started waking up with a tightness in my chest I couldn't explain. Performing didn't make it go away. Writing music didn't make it disappear. Even moments of joy felt incomplete, like something essential was missing. And the worst part was knowing exactly what that missing piece was and choosing again and again not to reach for it. There was a day when Jimin and I were practicing alone. No cameras, no staff, just the two of us and the echo of music in the room. At one point, he stopped dancing and just stood there, breathing hard, staring at the floor. I asked him what was wrong. He looked up at me and smiled, the kind of smile that tries to reassure the other person before itself. And he said, "Nothing, I'm fine." But I've known him too long to believe that. So I said his name just once and something broke. He didn't cry. He didn't raise his voice. He just said very quietly, "Do you ever feel like we're disappearing?" That question stayed with me because yes, I did, not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, piece by piece. The version of myself that laughed without calculating, the version that loved without fear, the version that believed being honest didn't mean hurting others. I realized then that the system we were living in wasn't just asking us to perform, it was asking us to sacrifice something sacred. It was asking us to be grateful for cages, as long as they were decorated with applause. And we were for a long time, because gratitude is powerful. It can keep you going. It can keep you loyal, but it can also keep you silent long after silence starts to hurt. I began to notice how often Jimin put himself last, how often he chose peace over truth, how often he apologized for things that weren't mistakes. And every time he did, something inside me burned not with anger, but with guilt. Because I was letting him do it. I told myself I was protecting him, protecting us. But protection shouldn't feel like erasure. Love shouldn't require someone to become smaller just to survive. And yet, that's what we were doing. There were moments when I wanted to scream. Not at fans, not at the industry, but at the idea that loving someone could be treated like a threat, that two people finding comfort in each other could be seen as dangerous. I watched how easily people speculated, how quickly affection turned into evidence, how kindness became a rumor waiting to explode. And I learned to fear my own instincts to pull back, to stay neutral, to act distant when all I wanted was to be close. That kind of restraint doesn't make you strong. It makes you tired. There were nights when Jimin would fall asleep next to me during long schedules, his head resting against my shoulder, trusting me completely. And I would stay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how unfair it was that the safest moments of our lives had to exist in silence. I started to wonder what kind of future we were building if this was the foundation. A future where love is always hidden, where honesty is always delayed, where happiness comes with conditions. That's not a future, that's survival. And survival, no matter how graceful, is not the same as living. I don't blame anyone, not fans, not the industry, not even myself. We were all taught the same thing, that some truths are too inconvenient to exist openly, that harmony matters more than honesty. That sacrifice is noble, even when it costs you everything personal. But knowing why something happens doesn't make it hurt less. What hurt the most was realizing that Jimin had started to accept this reality as permanent. Not because he wanted to, but because hope gets heavy when you carry it alone for too long. And I couldn't let that happen. Because loving someone means refusing to let the world convince them they deserve less. It means choosing their wholeness even when it complicates your own life. That's when I began to understand that staying silent was no longer neutral. It wasn't patience. It wasn't strategy. It was a choice. And it was a choice I could no longer make. This confession didn't begin as rebellion. It began as exhaustion, as grief, as the realization that if I kept choosing safety over truth, one day I would wake up and realize that both of us had disappeared quietly without ever being allowed to exist fully. I don't want that ending. And I know now that neither does he. I've stood on stages across the world, millions of eyes watching, lights blazing, music pounding through my chest like a second heartbeat. And yet, some of the most unforgettable moments of my life have happened in the quiet shadows behind those stages. It's strange, isn't it? People think the real story is in the performance, the choreography, the lyrics, the precision. But the real story, at least for me, was in the stolen glances during rehearsals, the breathless laughter between takes, the sound of Jimin's voice when he thought no one was listening. That's where the truth lived. But we learned early on that truth is a dangerous thing when you're famous. There was one night after a particularly intense show, we were both sitting backstage, drenched in sweat, exhaustion thick in our bones. Neither of us spoke for a while. We just sat there, backs against the wall, our fingers brushing in the space between us. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't some romantic movie scene, but it was real. That was the moment I realized just how much we had sacrificed for the sake of perception. Because behind the stage, away from the cameras, we didn't have to perform for anyone. We were just two people tired, relieved, grateful to still have each other in this life that so often demands everything from us and gives so little privacy in return. And yet, even in that safety, we didn't dare speak the whole truth. Not then, because we were still afraid. Afraid that the love we had, even if it was quiet, even if it never asked for approval, would be weaponized. That our closeness, our loyalty, our care would be twisted into something scandalous. That people who once cheered for us would turn away the moment we admitted our hearts were not available for fantasy. It hurts to admit this, but we built an entire world in the spaces where people weren't looking. The rooms without mirrors, the cars with tinted windows, the messages that would disappear, the long flights when we could pretend for a few hours that the sky protected us from scrutiny. We lived between moments. But Jimin, he made those moments feel infinite. Sometimes I wonder how we even lasted this long, how we survived the constant threat of exposure, the whisper campaigns, the way even our most innocent interactions became headlines. A touch on the shoulder, a laugh too loud, a shared lyric in a song, all of it dissected, consumed, and turned into speculation. You don't know what it's like to lose control of your own story, to wake up and find strangers debating whether your love is real, to read comments from people who claim to know your heart better than you do, to smile through interviews while your chest is burning with the weight of everything you can't say. We lived like that for years, not because we were ashamed, never because of that, but because we were protecting something fragile, something beautiful, something ours. And that's the hardest part, knowing that what we built in silence was powerful but not sustainable. I remember once during a fan signing, Jimin sat beside me, as usual. We weren't doing anything out of the ordinary, just greeting fans, smiling, joking lightly. But one fan leaned in and whispered to me, "We see it, you know. We see how you look at him." I froze. She didn't say it with hate. Her voice was soft, almost kind. But the fear that surged through me in that instant was overwhelming. Because if she could see it, how many others could? And if they could, how long until someone decided that love, our love, was the thing that needed to be destroyed? That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about how Jimin would react if I told him, whether he'd panic, whether he'd smile and tell me not to worry, whether it would change anything between us. When I finally did tell him, days later, he just looked at me for a long time and said, "Maybe being seen isn't the worst thing." I didn't know how to respond to that because it sounded like hope. And hope was dangerous. Hope meant imagining a life where we didn't have to hide, a life where love wasn't a liability, a life where truth didn't end in punishment. But part of me wanted to believe him, because Jimin, he's always been braver than people think. Not loud, not defiant, but brave in that quiet, steady way. Brave in how he still loves the world despite how often it hurts him. Brave in how he carries other people's pain even when he's drowning in his own. And somehow I became part of the pain he carried. Not because I hurt him intentionally, but because every time I chose silence, I asked him to shrink with me. Every time I told him we had to wait a little longer, I pushed our future further away. Every time I smiled and denied, I erased part of what we were building. He never said it out loud, not in those words, but I saw it in the way his shoulders stiffened during interviews, in the way he avoided certain questions, in the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, like he was asking silently, how much longer can we live like this? And I didn't have an answer, not then, but maybe this confession, this moment right now is the beginning of one. Because if I've learned anything, it's this. Love doesn't disappear just because you don't talk about it. It doesn't fade just because the world wants it to stay hidden. And it doesn't become less real just because it exists in shadows. No, love waits. It survives, it endures. But eventually, even love needs to be seen.
I used to think that if we just waited long enough, the world would change for us. That maybe the people who loved us, the ones who supported our music, our journey, our dreams, would eventually support this too. That time would soften the edges of judgment. That love, in all its forms, would be something fans could accept, even celebrate. But the truth is, waiting didn't make it easier. It just made us better at pretending. The longer we stayed silent, the more skilled we became at hiding in plain sight. We edited ourselves so much that I sometimes forgot what it felt like to speak without caution. Every interview became a puzzle, every sentence carefully crafted to say nothing too honest, nothing too revealing. We learned to say family when we meant each other. We said we are close instead of I love him. We smiled when the questions hurt. We joked when the silence between us became unbearable. Because the moment we were honest, even in the smallest way, people began rewriting our story. They called it fan service. They said we were playing a role. They accused us of teasing, of lying, of manipulating emotions. And worst of all, they said, it's not real. That was the part that stung the most. Because every shared glance, every unspoken moment, every lyric I wrote with him in mind was real. But once the world decided it was fiction, it didn't matter what we knew. And the irony, The same people who claim they want idols to be genuine are often the ones who punish them the most when they actually are. I don't say this out of bitterness. I say it because it's the truth no one wants to admit. The moment an idol becomes too human, the fantasy breaks. And when the fantasy breaks, so does the illusion of control fans think they have. And so they fight back, not always with hate, sometimes with denial, sometimes with guilt, sometimes with pain that has nowhere to go but toward us. I understand it now in a way I didn't before. The idea of losing something you love because it changes, it's terrifying. But Jimin isn't a fantasy, neither am I. We are two people who gave our entire youth to the world. We shared everything we could, our voices, our time, our dreams, but the one thing we kept for ourselves was this, us, the bond that formed long before we even knew what it meant. There's a photo I have. It was taken on a random day, in a hallway, no cameras around, just a quiet moment. Jimin is laughing at something I said, leaning slightly toward me, eyes scrunched, head tilted. That photo has never been posted. It probably never will be. Because it's mine. Because it's ours. And in that photo, you can see something I wish the world could understand. Not the drama, not the scandal, but the softness, the history, the home we built in each other. We didn't fall into this accidentally. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a phase. It was years of choosing each other in silence. Years of protecting something we weren't allowed to name. Years of watching other people define our connection while we stood quietly behind the curtain. But how long can anyone live like that? I remember a moment during a world tour when Jimin had a minor injury, nothing serious, but enough to make him hesitate before going on stage. I sat with him in the dressing room, both of us silent. And then he whispered, "Do you think they'd still love me if I stopped performing?" The question broke my heart. Because I'd asked myself the same thing, would they still love me if they saw all of me? Not just the performer, not just the polished image, but the human behind it. And if the answer was no, what did that say about the love we'd been shown? Was it real love, or just love for the illusion? Jimin never demanded anything from me, not clarity, not labels, not promises, but he gave everything, his trust, his loyalty, his heart. And what hurt most was knowing that the world might never see that part of him, the part I got to see when no one else was watching. He deserves to be loved fully, out loud, without apology. Not just by me, but by the world that claims to love him too. And maybe that's part of why I'm doing this now. Not just to tell you who I am, but to remind you who he is. He is not a rumor, he is not a headline, he is not a puzzle to be solved. He is a person who has walked beside me through storms I never thought I'd survive. He is the reason I didn't break. He is the laughter in my darkest nights and the calm in my most chaotic days. And the idea that loving him could be seen as betrayal. That's the lie I can't live with anymore. The truth is simple, and I'll say it again. I love him. Not as a performance. Not for attention. Not in secret anymore. But as a fact, as a part of my life, as the reason I am who I am today. And if that costs me something, then I'll pay it. Because some truths are worth everything, there wasn't one dramatic turning point, no spotlight moment, no cinematic scene where everything changed. The truth is, I didn't fall for Jimin all at once. It happened slowly, like sunlight rising behind closed curtains. You don't notice it at first, it's just a soft shift, a gentle warmth, and then one day you wake up and the whole room is filled with light. That's what it felt like with him. I used to think love had to be loud to be real, that it came with fireworks, grand gestures, bold confessions, but Jimin showed me something else. He showed me that love can live in the quiet things, the shared water bottles, the way he adjusts my mic without being asked, the way he waits for me to speak when I'm searching for words, the way he sees me even when I don't want to be seen. There was a night years ago when we were in a different country. We had just finished a long day, sound checks, press, rehearsal, performance. My body felt like it was made of bricks. My head was pounding. All I wanted was silence and sleep. I got back to the hotel room, collapsed into bed, and barely noticed when someone knocked on the door. It was Jimin. He didn't say much, just walked in, placed a small bottle of cold tea on the table beside me, and sat at the edge of the bed. I asked him why he came. He said, "You looked like you needed someone to just sit with you." And that was it. No lecture, no pressure, just presence. I don't think he even realizes what that moment did to me, how it settled something deep inside me, how it cracked open a part of my heart I had spent years fortifying, because I was raised to be strong, to be disciplined, to be unshakable, but Jimin saw through all of it. He always did. He never asked for the spotlight in my life. He never demanded anything from me, not clarity, not confirmation, not public acknowledgement. He just stayed, patient, steady, waiting for me to be ready. And that patience is what broke me. Because I realized I'd never met anyone who loved me so silently and yet so completely. We spent so many nights together, side by side on tour buses, in waiting rooms, in dressing rooms where time stretched between performances and the only sound was our quiet conversation. Sometimes we didn't even speak. Sometimes we just were. And in those silences, I heard everything I needed. That's how I knew. Not from a kiss, not from a confession, not even from the words "I love you," but from the way my world felt less complete when he wasn't in it. That knowing terrified me. Because if I admitted it, if I even let the thought take root, everything else would begin to unravel. My image, my future, my career, our safety. So I kept it quiet. I told myself it was just deep friendship. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself I could love him privately and still protect what we had. But love doesn't like being locked in cages. It stretches, it pulses, it aches to be acknowledged, and the more I ignored it, the more it demanded to be seen. I started writing songs differently. I didn't mean to, but somehow everything came back to him. The chords bent toward his voice. The lyrics mirrored his silences. The melodies sounded like the way he laughed when he thought no one was listening. I never told him that. I couldn't. But I think he knew. Because Jimin has always known more than he lets on. He notices the shifts in people. He feels moods the way most of us feel temperature. He knew when I was hurting. He knew when I was holding back. And he knew, long before I ever said it, that my heart had started speaking his name like a song on repeat. There were moments when I caught him looking at me with something unspoken in his eyes. Not doubt, not hesitation, just waiting. And that waiting, it wrecked me. Because I wanted to say everything. I wanted to tell him that his laugh was my favorite sound, that his kindness made me believe in softness again, that his presence felt like home in every city we visited, no matter how far from Seoul we were. But I didn't say any of that. I stayed silent. And silence, as I've said before, isn't peace. It's fear disguised as discipline. I kept thinking I needed the perfect time, the right moment, the ideal setting to tell him. But the truth is, the moment had already passed. Dozens of them had. I had already loved him in all the ways that matter without saying a single word. And yet, he never held it against me. He never rushed me. He just kept showing up. That kind of love, it's rare. It's sacred. And when you're lucky enough to find it, the worst thing you can do is keep it in the dark. So maybe this, right now, is my way of finally bringing it into the light. Maybe this isn't just a confession. Maybe it's a thank you. For the nights he stayed when I pushed everyone else away. For the mornings he reminded me I didn't have to be perfect to be loved. For the years he walked beside me, even when I was too afraid to hold his hand. Maybe I'll never find the perfect words to capture what he means to me. But I'll say this. He's the moment I knew I was no longer alone. And he's the reason I'm finally ready to stop hiding. For so long, I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing. That by staying quiet, I was protecting Jimin. That by keeping our love behind a locked door, I was preserving it. That silence was strength, that hiding was love. But the longer I lived in that silence, the more I realized something painful. Protection, when built from fear, eventually becomes a prison. And we were both serving a sentence neither of us agreed to. I could see it in his eyes, especially on the days when the pressure weighed heavier than usual. The days when the media speculated, when fans turned curious glances into accusations, when a single gesture sparked rumors we couldn't control. There were weeks when we barely spoke about it. Because what was there to say? I love you, but we can't be seen. I want you, but not publicly. I need you, but not enough to risk everything. Every one of those thoughts haunted me, because even if I didn't say them aloud, I lived them. Every cautious step I took, every moment I held back, became a message Jimin didn't deserve, but one he received anyway. And that's the thing about love. It doesn't just need words. It needs presence. It needs truth. And by denying ours, I was unintentionally telling him that safety mattered more than him. He never said that, not once. But I could see it. In the way he smiled a little less when we were surrounded by others. In the way his laughter faded faster than before. In the way he began to excuse himself from conversations where our closeness became a topic. We'd spent so long trying to protect each other that we didn't realize we were suffocating ourselves. The irony is cruel. We were afraid of losing the world, so we started losing each other instead. There was a day, I don't even remember the city anymore, just the hotel room and the weight of the silence between us. Jimin sat across from me, legs tucked beneath him, hands clasped in his lap. He didn't look angry, just tired. He said, "Do you ever feel like we've built a glass house? Beautiful, but one crack and everything shatters." I nodded because I did feel it. The fragility, the constant tension, the way every decision had to be measured against the backdrop of survival. But that night, something inside me shifted. I realized I didn't want to live in a glass house anymore. I wanted walls built from truth, a roof made of freedom, a door we could open without fear. Jimin deserves that. We deserve that. For too long, I let the fear of losing everything dictate what I could have. The fear of disappointing fans. The fear of corporate consequences. The fear of seeing our faces on tabloid covers with headlines we didn't write. But what about the fear of regret? What about waking up one day and realizing I had loved someone with everything I had, but given him nothing he could hold in return? Not words, not assurance, not a future. Just half gestures and silences masked as sacrifice. I couldn't do that to him anymore. Because while the world might never be ready to accept our truth, that's no longer my burden to carry. I used to think bravery meant enduring. But sometimes bravery means changing. And the change starts by admitting that love deserves to breathe, even if the air outside is harsh. There's something else I need to say. Jimin never asked me to choose. He never gave me ultimatums. He never once demanded that I go public or confess or take risks I wasn't ready for. But I think that's why this hurts more. Because he gave me all the space I needed, and I used that space to stall instead of build. He gave me silence, and I mistook it for permission to delay the truth. He gave me trust, and I let it sit untouched while I kept waiting for the right time. But there is no right time to tell the truth. There is only now or never. And I'm done choosing never. You see, I used to believe that the best way to love someone in this industry was to protect them from the spotlight. But now I know better. The best way to love someone is to stand beside them in full view and say, "This is real, this is mine, this is who I choose," over fear, over silence, over everything else. Because love that hides forever stops feeling like love. It starts feeling like shame. And I will not be ashamed of loving Jimin. Not anymore. So if the walls fall down, let them fall. If the glass shatters, let it break. If the world chooses not to understand, that's their loss. What matters now is that he knows. He knows that I see him, that I choose him, that I am no longer building a prison around us with my silence. Because love deserves more than protection. It deserves freedom. And I'm finally ready to give him that. There's something people don't talk about enough when it comes to fame. The cost of pretending. Not the cost in money, not even in time, but in pieces of yourself. For me, the silence wasn't just about hiding my love for Jimin. It was about slicing parts of my life into fragments, compartmentalizing, smiling here, hurting there, performing love songs while silencing the one love that mattered most to me, showing up for the world while disappearing from my own truth. At first, it was manageable. Necessary, even. The team said, "It's best to stay quiet right now." The brand said, "Keep the focus on music." The industry said, "Don't give them a reason to twist things." And I said nothing at all. Because I thought silence meant protection. I thought it meant maturity. I thought I was doing the right thing. But over time, that silence became a second skin. And second skins, no matter how well fitted, eventually start to suffocate. I began to feel distant from myself, from the music, from the mirror. I'd look at my reflection before a show, perfectly styled, perfectly rehearsed, and wonder, where am I in all of this? And more importantly, where is he? Where is Jimin in the narrative that the world keeps writing for me? He was in every quiet gesture, in every half-written lyric I never released, in every message I drafted and deleted, in every interview where I wanted to say his name but swallowed it like a secret I wasn't allowed to love. And slowly, I began to realize my silence wasn't just protecting him, it was erasing him. We would sit side by side in interviews, joking, playing our roles. But beneath the table, our knees would touch. A silent reminder, "I'm here, I see you." That was how we survived. Through eye contact, through coded language, through late-night phone calls when the rest of the world was asleep and we could finally speak without masks. But the cracks were growing, not between us, but around us. Every time the media created a new story. Every time fans dissected our interactions. Every time a company hinted that closeness was too much. I felt like the walls were closing in, not because we were doing something wrong, but because we were doing something honest. And honesty, in this world, is the most dangerous currency of all. Jimin never blamed me, never accused me, never pressured me. But I saw the way he started dimming himself to keep me safe. To keep us safe. And that was the moment I realized I couldn't keep pretending that silence was a noble choice. It was a fearful one. A self-preserving one. And while I don't regret trying to shield him from pain, I do regret letting him carry the burden alone. Because even if I wasn't saying anything publicly, he was being watched just as closely. Every glance, every interaction, every lyric that sounded too personal. The scrutiny didn't stop with me. It followed him, shadowed him, haunted him. And he never once complained. But I could see it. In the way his body tensed in crowded rooms. In the way he hesitated before speaking in interviews. In the way he started second-guessing himself, something he never used to do. He was shrinking, not from lack of love, but from too much of it, love that couldn't be named, expressed, or defended. And I let that happen because I thought we could wait it out. I thought time would eventually soften the edges. I thought if we just kept being careful, the world would make room for us. But the world doesn't make room for what it refuses to see. And the longer we waited, the more we lost. We lost moments. We lost comfort. We lost pieces of our joy. Even the simplest things, going out together, laughing too freely, sharing a song, became strategic decisions instead of spontaneous joy. And the guilt of that, it never left me. Because the one person who made me feel most like myself had to keep disappearing just to stay beside me. That's not love. That's survival. And survival is not enough when it comes to someone like Jimin. He deserves more. He deserves mornings that don't begin with fear. He deserves nights that don't end in whispers. He deserves to be seen not as a puzzle or a headline or a fantasy, but as a human being who chose to love me even when I couldn't give him the world he deserved. So when people ask me now why I'm speaking, why I'm risking so much, it's because the cost of not speaking finally became too high. Because the silence I thought was saving us was actually breaking us. Because I looked at the man I love and realized he had given me everything. And I had given him only half of me. And that's no longer enough. Not for him. Not for me. Not for the love we've spent years protecting. Fame has a strange way of blurring everything. It lights up your name, echoes your voice, multiplies your face on screens across the globe. But it also steals your privacy, distorts your intentions, and makes your truth feel like a myth. That's the world Jimin and I have lived in. Not just together, but within, surrounded by cheers and scrutiny, celebration and suspicion. And somewhere behind that noise, there was a space only we knew. A space without cameras, without rehearsed lines, without expectations. Behind the curtain, there was us. It's hard to explain what that world looked like. Because from the outside, our lives were public property. But in the shadows, we built a sanctuary out of small things. Like his hoodie that I always borrowed but never gave back. Or the way he'd leave notes on my water bottles during rehearsals, sometimes reminders, sometimes jokes, sometimes just a single heart drawn in black ink. Or the way we'd sync our playlists during long flights, pretending to be asleep while sharing the same song through one set of earphones. People think love has to be grand. But ours was soft, quiet, patient, the kind of love that survives in silence even when it's aching to be loud. I can still remember one moment so vividly. We were walking through a city overseas, hoods up, masks on, night falling around us. No fans, no managers, no schedules, just the sound of our footsteps and distant traffic. Jimin suddenly stopped, looked up at the sky and said, "Do you ever wonder what it would feel like to live without being watched?" The question hung in the air like fog. I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I didn't know. We've lived our entire adult lives in the spotlight. We've performed love songs for millions while being afraid to admit our own. But in that moment, with no one watching, I reached out and took his hand. And he didn't flinch. He didn't look around. He just held it like it was the most natural thing in the world. And for a few blocks, we walked like that. Two people, not two idols. No choreography. No cameras. No fear. Just us. But the moment ended when headlights turned the corner and voices approached from behind. We dropped hands instinctively, like we were hiding a crime. And that, more than anything, told me how broken things had become. Because love shouldn't feel like something you have to erase just to feel safe. It's one thing to protect a secret. It's another thing to live like your happiness is dangerous. And yet, that's what we did. For years. Because the world isn't gentle with truth. Especially not when it comes from people like us, people who are supposed to represent perfection, not reality. We tried to make peace with that. We told ourselves that what we had behind the scenes was enough, that the world didn't need to know as long as we knew that private love was still love. And maybe that's true. But the older I got, the more I felt like I was robbing Jimin of something sacred. Acknowledgement. Because love without acknowledgement starts to feel invisible. And invisible love eventually begins to ache. He would never say it outright. He's too careful, too kind. But I saw it. In the way he flinched when the topic of relationships came up in interviews. In the way he watched others live freely while we played pretend. In the way he sometimes looked at me with that unspoken question in his eyes. Will we ever get to be real? And for a long time, I didn't have the courage to answer. Because the cost of real in this industry is high. Sometimes it's your endorsements. Sometimes it's your public image. Sometimes it's everything you've built from the ground up. But I've reached a point where the cost of not being real is even higher. Because what's the point of building a legacy if it's built on a version of yourself that can't even love honestly? I don't want to stand on a stage 10 years from now, look out at a crowd of screaming fans, and feel hollow because the person who helped me survive it all is still standing in the shadows. I don't want to keep thanking the world while the one person I owe everything to stays invisible. And I definitely don't want to keep living a life where I have to choose between being loved by the world or loving someone in it. Behind the curtain, we found peace. But peace without light eventually becomes loneliness. So here I am, opening the curtain, not to destroy the illusion, but to offer something deeper. Reality. And in that reality, Jimin is not a mystery. He's not a subplot. He's not a theory waiting to be confirmed. He's the person I've shared laughter, pain, growth, and grace with. He's the reason I still believe in softness. He's the heart behind every lyric I was too afraid to explain. And now, finally, I want the world to see what I've seen all along. Not just a bandmate, not just a friend, but a love worth choosing. Again and again, in front of everyone, without shame, I've lost count of how many stories have been told about me. Some I've laughed at, some I've ignored, and some cut so deep that even silence couldn't protect me from the sting. But the hardest part wasn't hearing lies. It was knowing that the truth, the real, beating, beautiful truth, was locked inside me, too dangerous to share. That truth was Jimin. And not in the way headlines love to twist things. Not in some sensational, tabloid, clickbait kind of way. But in the way two souls quietly find each other in the noise and choose each other again and again, even when no one's watching. Sometimes I wonder, if the world had known the full story from the start, would it have changed anything? Would they have seen the truth in our smiles, heard it in the harmonies, felt it in the way we leaned into each other in the silences between the words? Or would they have buried it like so many truths that don't fit the mold? I'll never know. What I do know is that the world never gave us space to tell our story our way. So we told it in glances, in choreographed moments, in lyrics hidden behind metaphors. Do you want to know where the truth has always been? It's in every moment we shared a mic and didn't need to look at each other to stay in sync. It's in the way I sang certain lines softer because I was thinking of him. It's in the way he'd linger after rehearsals just to make sure I was okay. It's in the way we wrote songs that never said his name, but if you listened closely, it was always him. Jimin has been a constant in my life. Not because he had to be, but because he chose to be. And that choice, his loyalty, his gentleness, his quiet courage, has held me together more times than I can admit. People think they know us. They see the stages, the videos, the smiles, and think, that's all there is. But there's so much more. There's the version of us you'll never see in documentaries. The versions who take off the makeup, change into oversized shirts, and sit in the corner of a hotel room eating snacks and talking about fears we can't name anywhere else. There's the version of me that breaks down, not in front of a camera, but in front of him, because he's the only one who understands the weight I carry. And there's the version of him that cries quietly, not because he's weak, but because he's strong enough to let himself feel and lets me hold that sadness without flinching. You'll never read about that in an article. You'll never see it in a fancam. But that's our truth, that's our real. And it deserves to exist without apology. For so long, I feared that if people knew the truth, they'd take it away from us. That they'd try to dismantle what we built. That they'd label it, judge it, twist it into something it never was. But now, I'm no longer afraid of losing people who only ever loved the idea of me. If loving Jimin truly, deeply, unapologetically means some people walk away, then let them. Because I'd rather be loved for who I am than adored for who I pretend to be. And who I am is someone who has spent years carrying a love so profound it reshaped how I see the world. A love that made the brightest stages feel dim without him. A love that turned silence into something unbearable. A love that demanded to be named, not for the sake of the world, but for the sake of our own survival. You see, hiding didn't make us stronger. It made us lonelier. There were so many nights when I wanted to post a photo, to write a lyric, to say his name out loud and not fear the world's reaction. But I stopped myself every time. Because I was told, not yet. Not now. Think of the group, think of the fans, think of the fallout. And I did, I always did. But who was thinking of him? Of us? Love shouldn't feel like a crisis. It shouldn't feel like a scandal. It shouldn't require permission. But for people like us, it did. Until now. Because I'm choosing to say what should have been said years ago. Yes, I love him. Yes, it's real. Yes, we've been walking this path side by side, quietly, patiently, faithfully. And no, I'm not sorry. Not for a single moment. Because Jimin has been the calm in my chaos. The truth in my storm. The person I trusted with my full self when the world only wanted the polished parts. And from this moment forward, I refuse to let that kind of love live in the shadows. If the world had known the whole story from the beginning, maybe it would have been different. But even if it's only now that you're hearing it, I hope you listen not with judgment, but with understanding. Because this story was never about scandal. It was always about courage. And I finally found mine. I never planned to tell this story. Not because it wasn't important, but because I didn't know how. And maybe, deep down, I didn't know if I was allowed to. We live in a world that demands so much from people like us. Perfection, obedience, image control. We are praised when we give everything, but punished the moment we claim something as our own, especially something as human as love. So for a long time, I stayed quiet. I buried my feelings under layers of professionalism. I trained my expressions to be neutral. I learned to smile through moments when all I wanted was to scream his name. And then something shifted. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a specific moment. It was just exhaustion. A deep, soul-weary exhaustion that comes from hiding the very thing that gives you life. I woke up one morning and realized I was tired of smiling for cameras and not smiling for myself. Tired of protecting a truth that never asked to be hidden. Tired of whispering, "I love you," in the dark when all I wanted was to say it out loud, in the daylight, without shame. So I started writing this. No script. No approval. Just a voice memo, my voice, my truth. I called it a confession, not because we did something wrong, but because the world made it feel that way. And yet, the truth is simple. I love Jimin. Not with hesitation, not with guilt, but with a heart that has been sure for years. And maybe that's the most radical thing I can do now. To stand in front of you, stripped of the image, the perfection, the expectations, and just be real. There's a kind of power in finally saying it. I thought I would feel fear, but instead I feel free. Because everything I've held back, every moment I wanted to shout, every time I held his hand behind closed doors, every lyric that came from a place no one knew. It all led here, to this moment, to this breath, to this confession. And here's what I need you to understand. Loving him didn't make me weaker. It made me stronger. He saw the parts of me no one else did. The insecure boy behind the confident smile, the overwhelmed idol behind the cool exterior, the tired soul that just wanted to be held and not judged. He didn't just accept those parts, he loved them. And that kind of love, it doesn't fade, it doesn't ask for approval. It simply is. I remember the night we sat on the rooftop of our hotel, hidden by darkness, wrapped in blankets and silence. He didn't say anything for a while, neither did I. We just stared at the city below, so many people, so many lives, none of them knowing what was unfolding in that quiet pocket of sky. And then he whispered, "If the whole world turned on you, I'd still be here." I didn't answer, not because I didn't believe him, but because I knew it was true. He's always been here, even when I tried to protect him by pushing him away, even when I made choices that hurt us both in the name of safety. He stayed, not because he had to, but because he chose to. And now I choose him. Not behind closed doors, not in secret, but here, out loud, with all of you listening. I know this might change things. I know some of you may feel confused. I know there are people who'll try to spin this into something it's not. But let me be clear. This is not a scandal. This is not a betrayal. This is not a phase. This is love, and it has been for a very long time. And if you've ever felt something like that, something that makes your heart race and your soul settle at the same time, then I hope you understand why I had to finally say it. Because silence was starting to hurt more than the truth ever could. And while I never planned this confession, maybe that's what makes it real. There was no script, no PR team, no agenda. Just me, speaking from the heart, telling you the one thing that matters more to me than all the fame, all the awards, all the applause. His name is Jimin. And I love him, so here we are. The final part, the final page, the final breath of something I've held inside for so long, I forgot what it felt like to speak freely. And now that I've said everything, laid it all bare, I'm left with just one question echoing inside me. What now? What happens after you finally tell the truth? After you risk everything, your image, your career, your comfort, for something as simple and as complicated as love. I don't have all the answers, I won't pretend to. But I know this. I don't regret a single word. Not because it was easy, God, it was. Not because it guarantees a happy ending, life doesn't work like that. But because, for the first time in years, I feel whole. The silence that once protected me had started to suffocate me. And this was the only way to breathe again. There's a freedom in truth that I never understood until now. A kind of peace that doesn't come from being understood by everyone, but from finally being understood by yourself. And this story, our story, was never meant to be perfect. It was messy, complicated, quiet, brave. Full of detours and near misses and moments we thought we'd lost each other forever. But through it all, we never stopped choosing each other. Even when we couldn't say it out loud. Even when we hurt. Even when fear told us to hide. Jimin has been my constant in a world that changes faster than I can keep up with. When the world praised me, he grounded me. When it criticized me, he defended me. When I doubted myself, he reminded me who I was. He never asked for this spotlight. He never asked to be part of a secret. But he stayed anyway. And that's the kind of love that deserves to be honored, not with a whisper, not in the shadows, but in the light. I know not everyone will understand. Some people might feel betrayed by this. Some might say I changed, or that I owe them a version of myself that fits better into their expectations. But hear the truth. I never changed, I just stopped pretending. And if you've loved me for my voice, my honesty, my music, then I hope you can understand that this raw, unfiltered truth is a continuation of all of that. It's just another verse, another lyric, another note in a song I've been writing silently with my heart for years. A song about love, a song about courage, a song about two people who refused to let fear write the ending. So what now? Now I live. Now we live. Not in fear, not in apology, not in code, but in truth. We may never be able to walk down a street hand in hand without stairs. We may never post the photos we wish we could. We may still have to navigate this world carefully. But at least now, we don't have to pretend we're something we're not. At least now, when I look at him across a room, I don't have to hide the softness in my eyes. At least now, the songs I sing can finally sound like me. You don't have to approve. You don't even have to understand. But if you've ever claimed to love me, then I hope you know. This is the truest version of me I've ever shared with you. And I'm proud of it. Proud of him. Proud of us. Proud that we survived the silence and made it here. To this moment. To this confession. To this beginning. Because that's what this is, not an ending, but a start. The start of a life no longer built on pretending. The start of love that no longer hides. The start of a chapter where Jimin is not a secret, but a choice I continue to make every day. And I'll keep choosing him. In front of you. In front of the world. In front of the parts of myself that were once afraid. This isn't goodbye. This is the first time I'm saying hello to a life that finally feels real. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. And thank you for allowing me to finally be seen.